Therefore, it is time for question period. The Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. By now, everyone has seen or heard the taxpayer-funded Liberal advertisements. So, Mr. Speaker, I will ask the Premier, through you, Mr. Speaker, when will the Premier stop using taxpayer dollars to advertise for the Liberal Party of Ontario?
My resolve still remains, and I will work towards civility in the House. And if it continues, we'll get to work, and it won't stop. Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would say to the Leader of the Opposition, I do understand why he's taking this this particular tack in his questioning, Mr. Speaker, because he doesn't have a plan to reduce people's electricity bills. We do have a plan, Mr. Speaker, and that plan will cut people's electricity bills by 25%, Mr. Speaker, by summer. 17% on top of the 8%, Mr. Speaker. And if you are a low-income person in Ontario, Mr. Speaker, or you live in a rural or remote area under Hydro One and a number of other distribution companies, Mr. Speaker, your reduction could be 40 to 50%, Mr. Speaker, because we heard very clearly that those particular residents were struggling with their electricity bills to an even larger extent. So we have a plan, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to move forward and implement it.
Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier speculates why we're raising this issue. Mr. Speaker, using taxpayer dollars to advertise for the Liberal Party is wrong. That's why we're bringing it up. It is wrong. The Premier knows it is wrong. Now, the Liberals have a fascinating talking point. They say they have to run these Liberal vanity ads so they can use this information to tell people how to manage their budgets. But for 13 years, when they raised hydro bills 400%, did they ever run ads saying, sorry, we're raising hydro rates 400%, you need to manage your budget? Not for a second. This is about one thing and only one thing, and that's selling the Liberal Party using taxpayer dollars to do so. It's wrong, and my question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, you know it's wrong, do the right thing, stop running these ads.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Okay, both sides have had their chance, and if it doesn't come down, I'll bring it down for you. Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm not actually speculating on why the member is asking that question. I know exactly why he's asking the question. Because, Mr. Speaker, if he had a plan, he'd be pushing his plan. He'd be putting his...
As I've indicated before, when the Premier is answering, and I'm hearing heckling from the same side, it's very difficult for me to ask the other side to come to order. That's number one. Number two, right after I finish indicating to you that both sides are getting a little bit too carried away, it continues. So therefore, I'm moving to warnings. The Minister for Indigenous Relations is warned. Who's next? If you can't get my drift, then I'll have to point it out for you. Final no, sorry.
No. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So the other part of our plan, which is a real plan, which we are going to move forward to implement, is that we will hold rate increases to inflation for the next 4 years. So this is not about putting in place a reduction and then not holding those rates.
The member from Leeds Grenville is warned. Wrap up, please.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, we're creating a $200 million affordability fund for people who want to make investments and aren't able to do that.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier. Yesterday, the Attorney General alleged that they had strengthened the legislation to provide a clear definition of partisan advertising. But what did the Auditor General say about this? She said, I quote, "We cautioned when the government changed the law in 2015 that it was opening the door to spending taxpayer money on ads that appear partisan." And then the Auditor General said, sure enough, the government walked right through that open door that they created. Clearly, the Liberals are using a loophole they created to abuse taxpayer dollars. This is what it's about. They can do all the talking points they want. They can say they strengthen the laws or it's about budgeting. They created a loophole. They're driving a truck through it. It's abusive of taxpayer dollars. It's wrong. And, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier stop running these ads?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we created the legislation. We put the legislation in place in the first place because Mike Harris's face was all over advertising consistently, Mr. Speaker. But let me tell you about the other part of our plan, Mr. Speaker, which again is a real plan that is going to reduce people's electricity prices, which is the issue that we are dealing with in this province because we have made huge investments. We are in a situation where we have a clean electricity grid, Mr. Speaker, clean air because of shutting down the coal-fired plants, but there's a cost associated with that. So the other part of our plan, Mr. Speaker, is we are removing delivery charges from all on-reserve First Nation residential consumers, Mr. Speaker. And that is a huge issue. As some of the leadership in the First Nations has said, this will do a huge amount to deal with electricity poverty on reserves, Mr. Speaker. It's a very important step forward.
New question. Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Today is the first auction of the Liberals' cap-and-trade scheme where the Liberals hope to rake in $1.9 billion. That's $1.9 billion that taxpayers are going to have to foot the bill for. But maybe the worst part of this Liberal scheme is that it's going to send hard-earned dollars to California. Mr. Speaker, does the Premier think it's appropriate that her government will be encouraging businesses to subsidize those businesses in California?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, again, I know the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change is going to want to speak about this. It's a very important day. This is a very important program, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, we really believe that taking real action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions it's not just in the best interests of people today, Mr. Speaker. Most importantly, it's in the best interests of the future of the planet. It has to be done, and it has to be real, Mr. Speaker. And so what we've done is we have settled on the most cost-effective way to do that. The Leader of the Opposition has said that he would remove Ontario from the cap-and-trade market and put in place, Mr. Speaker, a program that would cost the people of Ontario, individuals, 4 times the amount that cap-and-trade will cost them, Mr. Speaker. 4 times the amount. That's irresponsible, Mr. Speaker, and if we look at other jurisdictions that have done just that, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions has not been as effective as what we've...
Thank you. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. The member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke is warned. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier, this government simply wants to make up numbers. It's more Liberal fake spin. What we do know factually is that under this Liberal scheme, Ontario will be sending upwards towards $300 million a year to California under this Western Climate Initiative. When businesses are struggling to stay afloat in Ontario, how this Premier thinks it's appropriate to be sending $300 million a year to California is beyond me. You know, we need a government that's going to support Brantford and Halton and Toronto and Ottawa and Timmins. Right now, they'll be subsidizing Beverly Hills and Hollywood. This Premier is the best Minister of Economic Development that the United States has ever seen, and it has to stop. Will the Premier do the right thing and make sure we don't send hundreds of millions to California?
Seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Premier.
To the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is an auction, an auction that should be free of political interference or actions by any member of this House that would seek to interfere or disrupt the auction. So I am not commenting on it, and I would give that strong advice to the member of the opposition. But tomorrow, when the auction is closed, I'll have lots to say to the member of the opposition about some of his behaviour, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite is proposing a system that cannot achieve the reductions we're getting and would move 5 megatons of leakage or see the relocation of companies. The position he's taken would see gasoline prices go up at 4 times the rate than they do under cap and trade. He is the best economic development leader for the United States that this legislature has ever seen.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Neither side is helping themselves. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier, and enough of the Liberals' fake spin. What we know for fact is this is going to send $300 million to California. Clearly, the Minister and the Premier haven't read the Auditor General's report. They're talking about emission reductions. The Auditor General's report points out that these emission reductions aren't going to happen in Ontario. They're going to happen in California. We want to see climate change tackled in Ontario. We want to see real emission reductions in Ontario. This is a shell game that makes businesses in Ontario less competitive. How does it make sense to take $300 million from Ontario businesses and send it to Beverly Hills? This is as bad as the Green Energy Act. They're signing Ontario up for another scheme that makes this province less competitive. Will the Premier at least acknowledge this hurts Ontario? There's still time to walk this back and say Ontario does not need to be part of the Western Climate Initiative because it subsidizes California.
Thank you. You seated, please. You seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I always enjoy these conversations with the Leader of the Opposition. They're so enlightening. So let me explain something. The market price directly reduces 4 megatons. The $6 to $8 billion in proceeds goes to Norva Corporation to support the reinvestment in their major, which is $250 million, in their major facility in Sarnia. Maybe you should talk to the member from Sarnia. Money is going into Gold Corporation to do the first net zero mine, which will dramatically cut their operating costs because they don't need ventilation with electric vehicles. Maybe he should talk to his northern members, because not only will he force out companies because it'll cost $74 a ton under your system, you won't have any money to reinvest in industry to decarbonize, and you will leave families with unaffordable energy bills, which you claim to care about.
Thank you. You seated, please. You seated, please. Thank you. Thank you. New question. The member from Toronto, Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Health, and I'm addressing this to the Premier, yesterday the Minister of Health boasted that he hadn't heard from a single hospital complaining about massive hydro bills. Clearly, the Premier and her Minister aren't listening. On February 2nd, 2017, the Ontario Medical Association said, and I quote, "Hospitals like South Bruce Grey Health Centre are forced to use their 1% funding increase to deal with skyrocketing hydro rates instead of patient care, thanks to the Ontario government." The Premier and her party ignored Ontarians' concerns about their soaring hydro bills until political pressure forced them to acknowledge the problem. Clearly, they haven't learned their lesson, since they're now ignoring hospital concerns about the same issue. When will the Premier admit there is a problem in hospitals, that she and her Minister of Health know about it, and when will she do something to fix it?
Good question.
Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Minister of Health, Long-Term Care.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And unlike the third party when they had formed government 20-odd years ago, We didn't take their approach where they closed 24% of acute hospital beds. We didn't take their approach where they closed.
The member from Timmins, James Bay, is warned. Finish, please.
We didn't close, as they did, 13% of the mental health beds in the province. We didn't decrease hospital funding, as they did in their last budget, Mr. Speaker. We have consistently invested in our hospitals and in the entire healthcare system in this province. Last year, by almost $500 million to increase the operating costs for the hospitals, as the member well knows from the conversation that I had with his leader in this legislature yesterday. We know that hospitals are facing challenge. We know that energy is a component. It's roughly 1% of operating costs.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, back to the Premier. Maybe she'll answer the question. In their pre-budget submission delivered directly to the government, the Ontario Hospital Association also made the case that skyrocketing hospital hydro bills are a huge concern in Ontario. Page 4 of their submission reads, and I quote, "Energy costs are putting a tremendous strain on hospitals. Hospitals are by no means immune from the same rising hydro costs that affect all Ontarians." Do the Premier or her minister not read documents given to her by official, nonpartisan and highly expert bodies like the OHA?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I acknowledge that energy costs are a concern for hospitals. It represents roughly 1% of their operating budget. We have consistently increased the budgets, the operating budgets of hospitals, as well as targeted funding we have, despite what the member opposite is saying, we have consistently increased the operating budgets and targeted funding for hospitals. But I want to point out, I want to give one good example from this week where Mackenzie Health actually received an award for converting all of their lighting to LED lighting. They are the first 100% LED lighting that has, and they've been financed to do that, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Kitchener-Waterloo is warned.
It's estimated, but through that process, they are going to be saving $210,000 each and every year. So I think there are excellent examples where hospitals are finding innovative and appropriate ways to work together in partnership with us to find ways to address that aspect of the budget, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. While I can tell the Premier doesn't like these questions, she's not answering them. It's not just the professional associations that have been raising a red flag about hydro costs.
The member from Beaches East York is warned.
Of the Windsor Regional Hospital alerted the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs that hydro costs at his hospitals were set to increase by $700,000 in just 1 year. Wow. He said in January 2016, last year, for our hydro costs at Windsor Regional Hospital, between our two campuses, we spent $3.5 million. This year, to the end of March, we're projected to spend $4.2 million, a $700,000 increase. Wow. If the Premier and her minister just ignore the experts and say that no one is worried, how can she expect Ontarians to trust that her phantom hydro plan is a genuine attempt to provide relief to Ontarians and not just a support-grabbing issue?
So, Mr. Speaker, we provided Windsor Regional Hospital with an increase in their operating budget of $9.9 million last year. Significantly, astronomically more than the numbers that have been quoted over a period of time by the member opposite. It's a 3.2% increase in their operating budget. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge that our hospitals are facing a number of pressures. And electricity, I have to reiterate, is roughly 1% of the total operating budget. I think there are hospitals around the province that can look, for example, to Mackenzie Health, that received from Electra, their distribution network, received a check for $125,000 to assist them in that conversion to 100% LED lighting. It's a great innovation, but it's an innovation that's going to save them nearly $250,000 a year on their electricity costs. The combination of investments that we make and innovations out there, I think, will help us address this particular issue, Mr. Speaker.
Good question. The member from Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, back to the Premier. Things are not all rosy out there. Hospitals in Sault Ste. Marie, London, Windsor and Toronto are all facing massive increases to their hydro bills. At the same time, the Premier and her Liberal government are chronically underfunding frontline health care and promising that their Phantom Hydro plan will include just 2% hydro relief for hospitals. Will the Premier tell people in any of these communities how a measly 2% savings on their hospital's hydro bill will ensure good quality care in their community?
Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we went through this, I think, as we remember, yesterday, where various examples were given. Hamilton was an example that was provided, where I referenced that we gave Hamilton Health Sciences last year a 3.6% increase in their operating budget, $29.5 million additional dollars to that corporation to assist them in not only providing and maintaining a sustainable operating budget, but also many new and important advancements that lead to the high quality of care that they provide. But I have to say I'm deeply disturbed that the member opposite continues to revisit Sault Ste. Marie, because that hospital had to go out publicly and oppose what had been declared and asserted by the member, the leader of his party, and the hospital had to go out publicly in the media and say that while electricity costs have risen over the past 5 years, those increases have not resulted in layoffs at the hospital, and no decisions have been made based on those electricity costs, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, back to the Premier. This problem is widespread. Access to information documents reveal that Health Sciences North in Sudbury and Peterborough's Regional Health Centre both saw their hydro consumption rates reduce over the same period of time as their hydro bills went up. That just doesn't make any sense. Can the Premier tell us if her 2% savings at least gives hospitals enough hydro relief to stop their bills from going up while the amount of energy they use goes down?
Minister.
Well, here we go again, Mr. Speaker. So, well, okay, Health Sciences North, you mentioned it. I'm going to respond directly to that issue. Health Sciences North, we provided them last year in a budget that they voted against, Mr. Speaker. We provided them with a 3.2%.
Last chance. Carry on.
So Health Sciences North received $8.8 million new dollars last year for their operating budget. And Mr. Speaker, Peterborough Regional Health Centre, a 4.3% increase in their operating budget last year, $9.4 million new dollars provided to them in a budget last year, in a budget that they voted against, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Again, Speaker, to the Premier. This is a widespread problem. The people of Niagara are worried about their hospitals too. The Niagara Health System saw a 96% increase in their hydro bills over 6 years. That translates to $2.8 million that could have been used to invest in more nursing hours or in potentially life-saving equipment. Why won't the Premier just come clean and tell people in Niagara, in Peterborough, in Sudbury, and across the province that our 2% hydro relief for hospitals is just part of her phantom plan, a not so thinly veiled attempt to buy support before the next election?
That's what it's all about.
Thank you. Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, again, the electricity costs for hospitals average approximately 1% of their total budget. That means that 99% approximately goes to all of the other expenditures. But to specifically, as was referenced, Niagara Health System, Mr. Speaker, last year received a 2.5% increase in their operating budget, amounting to $9.4 million. And that was more than enough to cover their increase in electricity costs last year, but substantially increased their operating budget for all of those other elements, the other 99% of the activities that take place in the hospitals, Mr. Speaker, that are so important to delivering high-quality care there and around the province.
Thank you. New question, the member from Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, my question's to the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care. Speaker, this government has a long history of putting their own political interests ahead of Ontarians. Prior to the March break, it was announced that the province had come to an agreement on the health transfers with the federal government, even though the offer was less than what the government originally demanded and less than what the federal government offered 3 months ago. That's good. Speaker, the previous Conservative government announced similar terms as the current Liberal government. The Ontario government then feigned outrage. Finance Minister Charles Sousa said Prime Minister Harper's Conservatives have launched an attack of Ontario. Mr. Speaker, where is the outrage from the minister in this government today? Why is the deal now acceptable that the federal Liberals are now in power?
Very good question. Thank you. Minister of Health.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of important differences in the agreement that we struck with the federal government compared to what was on offer by the Harper government, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. But at the end of the day, do we wish it had been more closer to what we had suggested? Of course we do. We had very strong third-party evidence to demonstrate that what we were asking was appropriate to not only maintain the federal contribution but also sustain our health care system effectively. That being said, Mr. Speaker, we reached an agreement which importantly not only provides for that annual escalator, but importantly, it applies additional targeted funding to two areas which are incredibly important to this province and this government and Ontarians, to home care and to mental health, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thanks, Speaker. Back to the minister. Speaker, the former Health Minister, Deb Matthews, said Flaherty's announcement was extremely bad news for the province. In fact, she said, this is devastating news for us. It means less money to reduce wait times and less money to hire nurses. Mr. Speaker, I have a simple question to ask the minister. Now that he's accepted the cuts from Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberals, can he tell the House how many nurses he's going to fire and how long the wait lists will grow, or was simply his previous Minister of Health misleading the public?
The member will withdraw. Minister.
We need to make important investments in our healthcare system, as we did last year, as we did the year before, and I have to say that the party opposite consistently voted against those healthcare investments. But what we won't do in the area of home care is what they did when they were in government in 2001, where they cut home care, slashed our home care so that CCACs were left with a $175 million shortfall. And as a result, in Hamilton, they had to cut the patient load by 32%. In Temiskaming, home care hours were reduced by 20%. In Pembroke, they cut service for 50% of their 3,000 clients. In Algoma, 25% of clients lost services. In North Bay, 20% of all visits were eliminated, and workers were fired and lost their jobs across the board. We won't repeat their mistakes. We invest in home care, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Good question. From Nickelville.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
People shouldn't have to pay up or wait longer for the care that they need. But that's exactly what's happening under this Premier's. Companies are charging people to jump to the front of the line. They're doing this unchecked under the Premier's watch. Right now in Ontario, for-profit companies like Maple are charging people for services like a doctor's diagnosis, writing a prescription. Does the Premier believe it is okay for a company to charge Ontarians to see a doctor or get a prescription?
Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Minister of Health, Long-Term Care.
Said yesterday, and I believe the day before as well, that we, as a government, this party, this government, is absolutely committed to the Canada Health Act, to the principles behind Medicare. 50 years ago, those important decisions that were made to provide universal health care to this province and to this country, Mr. Speaker. And that's why no government before us, it took our government in 2004 to actually put in place legislatively to make it the law of this province, Mr. Speaker, that what the member opposite is implying or suggesting is not permitted, that those activities and services, programs and services that are part of OHIP, that are publicly funded, that come underneath the Canada Health Care Act, the Canada Health Act, Mr. Speaker, that they are not permitted to take place in this province. There are activities that we are monitoring. I spoke to that yesterday, the day before.
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to follow
Supplementary.
Up.
Why is it that if it's not allowed, that it is happening right here, right now in Ontario? This is wrong. It has to stop. If if your child is sick, you should not have to reach for your credit card to buy answer. But companies like Maple are charging people to see a doctor, to get a diagnostic, asking family to rack up those credit card bills. That's wrong. That means with the Liberal government in charge, parents of a sick child are basically given the choice of paying up or waiting and waiting, and watching those who pay up leapfrog ahead of them on the wait list.
Is warned.
Maple actually says it charges fees for services like doctor's visit and getting a prescription because those services are, and I quote from their website, not covered by OHIP. So when did the Premier decide that people have to choose between paying up or waiting longer to get their family the care that they need?
No, sorry. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for the legislature to understand what the member opposite is talking about when she references these interactions. These are digital, these are online interactions that are taking place. Online interactions are not OHIP insured, but certainly it is something that I'm well aware of. In fact, I have had a conversation with the member opposite about this particular issue. I know it affects the community in Sudbury as it does in other parts of the province. I've asked my ministry to look at it specifically. It's very important that the principles that were laid out in the Act in 2004, that they be followed in terms of no payments for activities or services that are covered by OHIP. Virtual visits are not OHIP insured activities, but as I mentioned, my ministry, and partly as a result of the member having a conversation with me about it, my ministry is looking into this issue, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. New question, the member from Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, today marks World Water Day. Wow. It is a day not only to be grateful for Ontario's vital resources, but a day to also confirm our commitment to protect and restore our waters. In my riding of Kingston and the Islands, Lake Ontario is an integral part of our economy, our community, and it brings together members of my community as well. Ontario relies on the Great Lakes for our strength and success, and I am pleased to see our government take continued action to protect our lakes and restore them to environmental health. Mr. Speaker, we know that 99% of Ontarians live around the Great Lakes, making it even more critical that the health of our waters and ecosystem are looked after. Mr. Speaker, can the minister please explain to the House the efforts our government has made to protect the Great Lakes?
The Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, it's no surprise that the environment questions come from this side of the House. I want to thank the Premier for reaching out to our governors. I've been hearing in my conversations with my counterparts that she's being recognized for stepping up and taking a leadership role on this important issue. So thank you very much, Premier. $300 million is at stake, which has huge consequences. We passed the Great Lakes Protection Act. We have source water protection, and our conservation authorities, under the leadership of the Minister of Natural Resources, are kicked into action. I also want to thank what the opposition criticized, which was the Guardian Council as being bureaucratic. It's totally volunteer. That organization, co-chaired by Grand Chief Mataby, works with mayors, farmers, business leaders, local environmentalists, is now coordinating multi-level government action to protect the Great Lakes and engage Americans. We're very, very, very concerned about this, Mr. Speaker, and acting quickly.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that response. It's very encouraging to hear that our province takes the health of our Great Lakes very seriously. It is also promising that Ontario has worked so collaboratively with varying levels of government, including our partners in the U.S., to restore the health of the Great Lakes. Shared waters absolutely requires a shared responsibility to conserve and protect.
That's right.
Recently proposed funding reductions in the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative will seriously impact the progress that we've made so far. For more than 40 years, Ontario has worked with our state partners through various Great Lakes agreements. And given that the Great Lakes is an economic engine for Kingston and the Islands and our province, it is critical that we continue to collaborate operate with our existing partners. Can the minister please explain to the House how our government plans to move forward to keep our Great Lakes and well protected?
Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to working with my counterparts in the 8 Great Lakes states, we have a very strong relationship with Quebec. Notre partenariat avec Québec, c'est très important. Nous travaillons.
Our relation with Quebec is very important, and we work also with other colleagues in Quebec, and also with the Ministry of Intergovernmental Affairs, because for us it's a challenge for the economy of the Great Lakes. The success of our partnership have contributed with investments in all over communities like Misquapian and also on the American side. It exists also for us because the small communities around the Great Lakes are challenged by the same. It's very important for the economy because the result resulting from the cuts in the United States will have a great impact.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Premier, 10 years ago, a local restaurant in my riding, Fork and Plate, had a hydro bill of $600 per month. Today, their bill is at least $2,200, and in the summer, it climbs to $3,500. So your 25% figure includes the HST rebate you have already announced. So it's really 17%. In the last 10 years, you have more than tripled the hydro bill. This is your legacy. Now you offer them a fraction in return. To top it all off, InPower is asking for a retroactive rate increase. Premier, when will you do the right thing and provide real and lasting relief to families and businesses?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to let the legislature know, and I know some people are seeing it on their social media, that the news is breaking that there's been an incident near the UK Parliament. Dozens of people on the Westminster Bridge have been injured. Parliament is in lockdown, and I just wanted folks to know that, and I think all of our thoughts are with the people and their families and parliamentarians in England. We have a plan. The business that the member opposite is talking about will see, it's true, an additional 17% reduction. 17 plus 8 is 25%, Mr. Speaker. It's very important to us that those local businesses are able to thrive, and that's exactly why we're bringing a plan forward. And you know, I know that the opposition doesn't have a plan that will reduce electricity bills. We do, and we're going to move ahead so that businesses just like this one will be able to see that reduction, Mr. Speaker.
That's not. That just doesn't cut it for the people in my riding or across Ontario. We all know margins are slim in the restaurant business. Businesses provide jobs that in turn provide for families. Right. Fork and Plate proudly employs 22 of my constituents. Restaurants like Fork and Plate across Ontario look at their hydro bills and question how they can stay afloat. Premier, enough is enough. Why are you threatening jobs in my riding and across the province?
Thank you.
Minister of Energy.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I'm pleased to rise and talk about the Fair Hydro Plan and the 25% reduction that all families, small businesses and farms will be receiving across the province. And I know the honourable member mentioned Innu Power and their rate application, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's important to mention as part of our Fair Hydro Plan and bringing down electricity costs, where our government is also providing additional support to those facing the highest delivery costs in the province, Mr. Speaker. And this will, when introduced, Mr. Speaker, regarding the distribution charges levied, there will be 8 utilities with the highest rates, which will be lowering their distribution rates to protect ratepayers in those areas, Mr. Speaker. Innu Power is one of those utilities whose distribution charges will be reduced, Mr. Speaker. And as we said, that 25% reduction with the RRP reduction that they're going to be seeing through Innu Power, Mr. Speaker, they can see anywhere up to a 40 to 50% reduction.
Wow. Thank you. Your question, the member from Timiskaming Cochrane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. I'd like to tell a little tale about Henry Fezette and Sons Limited in Elk Lake. They're Jerome and Terry are pillars in that community. They run a machine shop. Their hydro usage in January 2011 was 391 kilowatt hours per day. They made huge changes in their business, and in January 2017, their kilowatts per day were 220. So that was a 43% decrease. They have done their part. Good for them. Yet the bill, the overall bill, went up. It went up. Actually, the cost per kilowatt hour went up by 66%. Wow. Will you finally admit that your hydro plan for people like Henry Fezette and Sons has been a disaster for the last
Question. Thank you.
Minister of Energy.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased again to rise and talk about Ontario's Fair Hydro Plan that is specifically looking after folks that live in the rural and remote parts of our province, Mr. Speaker, because we have heard over the last 9 months that I've been in this portfolio, and even longer, Mr. Speaker, that there were concerns by businesses, by families that were in the rural and northern parts of our province. And so, Mr. Speaker, we brought forward rebates at those times, but they were very targeted in source, Mr. Speaker, and didn't necessarily provide the necessary relief that they were looking for. That's why the Ontario Fair Hydro Plan actually reduces those bills by 25%. And for businesses, Mr. Speaker, if they're time-of-use businesses, they will qualify for this. There are also other programs out there that actually help businesses lower their rates. I know the member talked about some of the programs that they were using, lowering their bills, which is great, Mr. Speaker, because that actually helps everyone across the province lower their energy consumption, which allows us not to build generation, Mr. Speaker, and lowers our cost.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Speaker, this government has been in power for 15 years. And now they're in danger. Their poll numbers are going down, so now they implement the Fair Hydro Plan. Where were the people? Where were they thinking about the people like Jerome and Terry and all the other business people and all the other residents all these years with their long-term energy plans? They never took the actual people who are paying the bills into account. It's a little too late now.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We took action, Mr. Speaker, when we took over as government, rebuilding a system, Mr. Speaker, that was left in tatters by previous governments that cancelled programs, froze rates, and never invested in a system. We made sure that folks in Northern Ontario had access to power, Mr. Speaker, because before we were having an unreliable system that were never invested in by the previous governments, and they know it, Mr. Speaker. So as we rebuilt the system, as we eliminated coal, we invested $50 billion, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that we have a clean system, a reliable system, and now, Mr. Speaker, we're working to make it as affordable as possible. The Ontario Fair Hydro Plan, Mr. Speaker, will bring forward a 25% reduction for all families.
Thank you.
Even more in rural areas, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Your question? Member from Scarborough-Legion Court.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care. Registered practical nurses play a vital role in Ontario healthcare system. As a former nurse, a nursing professor, and administrator in long-term care facility, I know nurses are the largest group of healthcare professionals who provide quality care in my riding of Scarborough-Agincourt and across the province, in hospital, community, correctional facilities, local schools, long-term care homes, and retirement homes. The influence and impact nurses have on our patients, their families in this province can't be quantified or measured, Mr. Speaker, because they are educated, dedicated, hardworking, knowledgeable care group of individuals who give so much of themselves at work in our community every day. And I want to recognize the hundreds of RPNs working in my riding of Scarborough-Agincourt, Mr. Speaker. They include Scarborough Hospital Birchmount Campus, St. Paul Lambertview Senior Centre, Tender Care, Shepherd Village, Mount Jean Nursing Home, TransCare, and Care First. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister, what message does the Minister want to say to the RPNs who are visiting Queen's Park today?
Minister of Health, Long-Term Care.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I want to say thank you to our nurses, and particularly to those nurses, the RPNs who are here today with RPNAO on their Queen's Park Day. They are absolutely outstanding, and they do outstanding work. Mr. Speaker, we value the work of all our nurses. Since 2003, we have increased the number of nurses employed in this province by 26,000. And specific to RPNs, Mr. Speaker, we have increased the number of RPNs working in this province by 15,700 since we came into office in 2003. That is a growth of 61%. We value the work that each and every one of those RPNs does in this province. And, Mr. Speaker, we continue to make those investments in all our nurses, including in RPNs. Just since 2015 alone, there are 2,400 more RPNs employed. That's a growth rate of 6.1% just in that period alone.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the Minister of Health for his dedication to the nurses in this province. RPNAO, who is here today at Queen's Park, represent the voice of over 46,000 RPNs in Ontario, Mr. Speaker. And our province continued to be proud to stand alongside with these nurses since we came into office. Since 2003, as the minister said, there are 15,000 more RPNs employed in this province. And I want to remind the member opposite about this, a growth of more than 60%, including nearly 10,000 new RPNs since 2012. This means, Mr. Speaker, we have more RPN working across the province, providing high-quality care to Ontarians in hospital, in public health, in long-term care homes, family health care teams, community health care centre. Mr. Speaker, through you to the minister, can he please inform the House what our government's commitment to continue working with RPNs in Ontario?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's absolutely right that our government is proud of the track record we have working with nurses in this province. Together with nurses and associations like the RPNAO, we've made great progress, not only ensuring that there's a stable RPN workforce, but also ensuring that Ontarians are receiving the best possible care. But we also know, Mr. Speaker, there is more work to be done, and that's why I want to reiterate this government's commitment to continue to work with Ontario's nurses, not only to support them and their workforce, but also to grow their practice and their scope to provide high-quality care to even more Ontarians. RPNAO has been clear that scope of practice changes would help address certain barriers and ensure patients receive faster access to the right care, and our government agrees. We know that by working together on increasing RPN scope, we can further improve access to care for Ontarians and reduce wait times even further. We're committed to working with RPNAO on this important initiative.
Your question, the member from Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Speaker, many constituents are sending me their hydro bills and letters expressing their outrage and their concern. The Calberries are a retired couple on a fixed income in Hardington, and they followed every step laid out by this government to help conserve energy. They schedule their lives by their time of use meter. A 17% reduction is not enough for them and many others in my riding. In the words of the Calaberries, these so-called reductions being rolled out are nothing but a case of giving with one hand but taking with two. Speaker, when will this government stop giving with one hand and hurting so much with the other two?
Thank you.
Minister of Energy.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased that the member knows about the Fair Hydro plan and the 25% reduction that is coming to the seniors, Mr. Speaker. And it is important to know, Mr. Speaker, that I'm assuming that these individuals are Hydro One customers, Mr. Speaker. That means that they're also going to see a significant reduction from the RRP. Wow. That will actually reduce their bills between 40% and 50%. And on top of that, Mr. Speaker, on top of that, they can also apply for the Ontario Electricity Support Program, which, through the Ontario Fair Hydro Plan, Mr. Speaker, is actually going to give them an additional reduction on top of that, Mr. Speaker. So you know what? We need to ensure that couples like the seniors that have been mentioned by the honourable member ensure they know about the Fair Hydro Plan and know about the reductions that are coming, Mr. Speaker, because we actually have a plan like that party. They do not, Mr. Speaker.
I'll try again to the Premier, Speaker. The Taylors are another retired couple in my riding in Carleton Place who have to spend their retirement living by the schedule of the time of use meter. They do all their chores on the weekend, they cook in the dark during the week. The Taylors believe that retired people should not have to go to such extremes, and I fully agree. The fact is that no matter how hard people try, hydro is just too expensive. Their last bill was over $400. Speaker, I'm going to send these letters over to the Premier. Her responses have not been adequate. Will the Premier commit to reading these letters so that she fully understands the hurt she has caused and respond directly to the Calberries and the Taylors?
Question, thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're more than happy to continue to respond to the needs of Ontarians. That's why we acted, Mr. Speaker, with the Fair Hydro Plan, something that we have brought forward, Mr. Speaker, to help every family in the province with a 25% reduction, Mr. Speaker. That also goes to family farms and to small businesses, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, we have the Ontario Electricity Support Program, which actually will help many families as well, Mr. Speaker. We want to ensure more families, more individuals that actually would qualify for this program get on it, Mr. Speaker, because they can actually see their bills reduced even more. And to help families even further, Mr. Speaker, we brought forward the Affordability Fund. The Affordability Fund is a trust that will be in place, Mr. Speaker, to allow families to access dollars to actually increase their insulation, to actually help them reduce their bills even more, Mr. Speaker. The Fair Hydro Plan is the single largest reduction in electricity bills in Ontario's history, and it's a plan that we're very proud of.
Thank you. Your question, member from Oshawa.
Thank you, Speaker, and my question is to the Premier. Hardworking Ontarians are stressed and they are becoming sick over unpredictable work schedules. These are the findings of a recent survey done by the Ontario Federation of Labour. Job prospects are getting worse, wages are down, and the cost of living keeps going up, but the Liberals aren't willing to alleviate this stress and raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Does the Premier have the final report of the Changing Workplaces Review? And if she does, what is she waiting for? When can I'm not finished. When can hardworking Ontarians expect changes to dangerously outdated labour standards? Now I'm finished.
Minister of Labour.
Thank you. Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased to answer that question. Thank you, thank you to the member for that question. It is important, Speaker. We know in the province of Ontario that the nature of work in this province is changing, and it's affecting people in ways we'd sooner not see, Speaker, and we're determined to do something about it. As a result of that, Speaker, less than 2 years ago, we started the Changing Workplaces Review. Yes. We got two esteemed gentlemen to do that work, Speaker, somebody from the side, somebody who's been associated with employers in the province of Ontario, somebody that's been associated with employees and organized labour in the province of Ontario. Speaker, I'm expecting to get the best advice from these people after they've been out speaking to Ontarians all around this province, Speaker. We're determined to bring forward a report that stands up for working families in the province of Ontario.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you. And again to the Premier. Ontarians are working 2 and 3 part-time and piecemeal jobs without knowing when they'll be scheduled next, while they are struggling to pay rent and hydro bills that keep going up even when their pay doesn't. They deserve wages they can count on, they deserve hours that they can rely on, and they deserve schedules they can plan around. They deserve better jobs. Does the Premier have a copy yet of the final Changing Workplaces Review? This government has said spring of 2007, and it's spring. So these problems aren't going away. They're still dragging their feet, and I'd like to know, what does the Premier have to say to Ontarians that simply can't wait any longer?
Thank you. Minister.
For that supplementary question. Speaker, we've gone out to the people in the province. We've asked for their advice. We've talked to business, Speaker. We've talked to employers. We've talked to organized labour. We've talked to advocacy groups, Speaker. They've all given us the best advice. All that advice is being compiled, Speaker. We had an interim report in the spring, and we're asking the advisors to bring us forward their best recommendations, Speaker. That will be done in a timely manner, Speaker. I'm expecting it within days or weeks to land on my desk. It will be translated, Speaker. It will be made accessible, Speaker, and a discussion will take place that involves everybody in the province of Ontario to make sure that this province remains an excellent place in which to work, Speaker.
Thank you. Your question, the member from Beaches East York.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and my question is to the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. Now, Speaker, as you know, our government provides funding to support critical infrastructure and provides training to create better opportunities for Indigenous people. And this helps them gain meaningful employment and assists them with business development across various sectors. Investing in the economic development of our urban and rural Indigenous communities benefits all of Ontario by offering students, entrepreneurs, workers and businesses critical tools for success through partnerships with various Indigenous agencies. So, Speaker, will the minister please provide this House with an example of the good work that one of these agencies is doing that the Aboriginal Economic Development Fund has supported?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for that question. The Aboriginal Economic Development Fund is an important investment tool for Indigenous peoples across Ontario. This year, the Anishinaabe Employment Training Services received $250,000 through this fund for its construction craft worker training program. Upon completion of the program's first component, students begin the 7-week construction craft worker training program, followed by a further week of resume building and interview preparedness. The training offered in partnership with North Star Training Facility provides prosperity for Indigenous people, which in turn helps all of Ontario and all of First Nations prosper. This is good news for the Indigenous people of Ontario and for all Ontarians.
Sir, thank you. Supplementary.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the minister. I'm delighted. I know that my constituents in Beaches East York are also delighted to know that the government is supporting an Indigenous-led program to help create economic opportunities for Indigenous communities to help build a stronger and more prosperous Ontario. And I'm also proud to see that our government is living up to the commitments it has made to create and improve economic outcomes for Indigenous people. By providing the necessary supports, we are partnering with Indigenous communities to develop long-term strategies and to diversify local economies while collaborating on region-wide projects. Well, Speaker, in Beaches East York, I have numerous representatives in the Aboriginal community who come to me on a regular basis looking for opportunity which can be assisted by these agencies. So, Speaker, will the minister please elaborate on the impact this has had on our community members who have been involved with this program?
Question. Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, here's an example. I recently had the pleasure of hearing from Sage, who is a member of the Anishinaabe Nation. After living many years in Thunder Bay, Sage found finding secure employment a real challenge. He heard about the Aboriginal Employment and Training Services Apprenticeship Program, and he seized the opportunity to become involved. In regards to the program, Sage said personally, he described it as a rewarding and positive experience that put him on another road, another path in life. Sage successfully completed the 7-week construction craft training program. He tells me that the experience has left him with the desire to pursue his apprenticeship to its completion with the ultimate goal of achieving his journeyman certification. That is good news for Sage. Again, that is good news for everyone in Ontario. It's good news for the union movement.
Thank you. Your question, the member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
The question is for the Minister of Transportation. Last year, the minister joined me and Renfrew County officials to go over the ongoing issue of the continued twinning of Highway 17 and to see the roadway for himself. While the project reached Shield Drive last year, the next phase still is yet to make it into the ministry's 5-year plan. Highway 17 connects Canadian Nuclear Laboratories and Garrison Petawawa to the nation's capital. It is also a major artery for commercial truck traffic. Moreover, this project is vital to the economic development of Eastern Ontario because the roadway is an east-west transportation corridor. Given how crucially important this roadway is, will the minister finally commit today to putting the twinning of Highway 17 into his ministry's 5-year plan?
Thank you. Minister of Transportation.
Thanks,
Thanks very much, Speaker. I want to thank the member from Renfrew and Nipissing Pembroke for the question. He is right. In December of last year, I had the opportunity, with his help, frankly, Speaker, and with help from municipal leaders, from ordinary residents, representatives from Garrison, Petawawa, representatives from the nuclear industry, Speaker. I heard loud and clear in that forum from all of those participants about the critical need for our government to continue to invest in highway infrastructure like this particular project. Speaker, I understand that that member knows that we have, over the last number of years, continued to make progress on the four-laning of this highway. I certainly know, as I said that day, that more work needs to be done. They made a compelling case, Speaker. I'm quite happy to continue to work with that member, to work with his community, and to be in a stronger position to provide more updates in the coming weeks and months. Thanks very much, Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Back to the Minister. Speaker, the Minister has heard the county government's case for the continued twinning of Highway 17. They have done their due diligence. It's now up to the Minister. Last year, the Minister saw for himself the heavy volume of private and commercial traffic on Highway 17. As he said himself, and he saw the examples, he heard from Garrison, Petawawa. He heard from Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, presentations from both of them, as well as presentations from the county and the town of Renfrew. In the Minister's own words, about the day in the county, he said, and he repeated it today, all of you collectively are making a compelling case. I've heard the message loud and clear. Speaker, since the case has been made, the Minister agrees that it's a good case. I will ask the Minister yet again if he will commit today to putting the next phase of the twinning of Highway 17 into his ministry's next 5-year capital plan.
Minister.
Well, thanks very much, Speaker. I thank the member again for his follow-up question. He was kind enough to quote me from that public forum that took place in December in his community. And he is right. Those are the words that I used. In fact, they match the words that I used in response to your to the member's first question today. There has been and there continues to be a compelling case that community is making. I listened very closely, Speaker. We had a chance. We haven't talked about that so far today, Speaker. We had a chance to take a tour of the highway to see the difference, frankly, Speaker, between where the four-laning has already occurred and where it has not yet occurred. So I've seen it, Speaker. The ministry, we were joined that day by the Ministry of Transportation's regional director, who understands the issue as well. So I thank the member for continuing to advocate. As I said in the response to the first question, I expect over the next number of weeks or months there'll be additional updates that we can provide. And I thank the member for bringing it not only to the floor of this House, but for continuing to talk to me and my ministry about the importance of continuing to invest in critical transportation infrastructure.
New question, member from Algoma, Manitoulin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to you. My question is to the Premier. Today is World Water Day. I want to take a moment to remind his government that in a wealthy province like Ontario, many First Nations communities are still struggling to get clean drinking water. Our province has more boil water advisories than any other province in this country. How can we tolerate this happening today, that some communities up north are living without clean drinking water, while a boil water advisory in southern Ontario wouldn't last more than 48 hours? Why is this government not acting to provide clean drinking water to First Nations and stopping this crisis? How is not making sure every community in Ontario has access to clean drinking water, and why is it not a priority for this government? Let's remember, water is life.
Speaker, I completely agree with the member opposite that this is an issue of highest priority, Mr. Speaker. Both the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation have been working with First Nations and with the federal government, Mr. Speaker. I believe the last list I saw, I think there were 47 communities where there were boiled water, 20 boiled water orders, 20 of them, Mr. Speaker, there was work underway, another 27, there was work that had not yet begun. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a very high priority. We want to see those communities taken off boiled water orders, and more than that, Mr. Speaker, we want sustainable plans so that going forward there is the capacity to troubleshoot, to make sure that when a water system is put in place on a reserve, that water system can be maintained, Mr. Speaker. That's the work that we're doing.
Thank you. Pursuant to Standing Order 38A, the member for Timiskaming Cochrane has given notice of his dissatisfaction to the answer to his question given by the Minister of Energy concerning hydro rates. This matter will be debated today at 6 p.m.
Point of order, Speaker.
Point of order from the Government House Leader.
The member, by his own admission, admitted that he didn't even ask a question.
Okay. You can't have another question. There are no further deferred votes. This House stands recessed until 3 p.m. this afternoon.